Welcome to the McCombs Wellness Collective podcast, where we aim to improve overall health and wellness of the UT McCombs MBA community through promoting healthy habits and sharing personal wellness stories. Many stressors can emerge during an MBA, and we hope that this podcast will help you prioritize your health during your time at McCombs and onward through the rest of your life. All right, welcome back to the Wellness Collective's podcast. This week, I'm joined by Thomas Galluccio, second year MBA, and also one of the leaders of the Wellness Collective. So thanks, Thomas, for coming on the podcast.
Glad to be here, Mike. I really appreciate kind of what you do with this podcast every 2 weeks. I think it's phenomenal. So I'm happy to be a guest today. Yeah.
Thanks. I really enjoyed and hearing people's wellness stories and lessons learned. Hopefully that something I can learn from or any other classmate. So starting off, I wanted to dive into your background just so people know who you are, where you're from, and kind of what brought you to McCombs. I know it's a loaded question, but you can take it wherever you want.
Yeah, totally. So I grew up in Connecticut, which is sort of far from, where I've moved career-wise, I guess. Like, I grew up and my best friend's dad was kind of like an energy executive, and he's very old. He was like 75 when I was in high school, which was kind of weird, but he was, this extraordinarily vibrant, tall guy who worked in the oil and gas industry, and hanging out with my friend effectively, and his dad, like, I developed this like strong passion for like oil and gas, which is kind of a weird area. Like, again, if you live in like Connecticut, like nobody's really like, oh yeah, like, I'm gonna go work in the industry. It's like, it's like finance or whatever.
Submarine capitals in Connecticut.
Submarine, well. Yeah, Sikorsky, helicopters, that kind of thing. So kind of like, picked sort of a financial path to get there. Went and majored in, financial economics at Columbia. Kind of, enjoyed my time there. It's like, it's kind of like all hipster kids at like, it's like less hipster than like NYU. But it's like this cool kind of like, you get to live in a small town in this like Morningside Heights area. And, you also kind of can, if you're competent, as a young person, you can like go downtown and kind of explore and see all there is to see of like New York City. But yeah, sort of started on this like financial path of like, okay, in the long term, if I want to go and like, follow in kind of my friend's dad's footsteps and like make a company, like where do I want to start that? Like what makes the most sense? Like, and so kind of like, in college, I was trying to kind of do like, what they call like equity research, which is like, you kind of work at a bank and you kind of chill and like write research reports. Couldn't get a job in that. Could not get a job. So spent some time working like on it. Actually, my friend's dad's oil field actually on one summer, and realized that was not a great way to kind of get in the industry. It's very hard work, which, like, not to say that's like so negative, but yeah, ultimately it was like, okay, I needed a job when I graduated, so I took a job at in investment banking, which interestingly was pretty easy to get into, or I guess easier to get into than I had anticipated. Just like, serendipitously got, some firm came in, lobbed me an offer. They're sort of like, I interviewed with them for like one round, and they're kind of like, okay, we'll get back to you. And then I got an offer like a month later, which is kind of weird. And it turned out actually, like, when I went and started to work at that firm, that like there were two other people who had gotten the job offer before me, and they're just like turned it down. So, I mean, wow. Sometimes you win like that. So my first job out of college, was was working in like leveraged finance at a Canadian bank. And again, I think from the health and wellness perspective, like the most striking thing to me about starting to work, like, you know, having not really had a real job prior to that, right? Like having like part-time jobs, maybe like, you know, doing tutoring for kids or like volunteering, but never really having like a real job. And then, you know, you add to it the fact that like your hours are like Uber hours, like you're working, you know, the entire day kind of. It was kind of like a shock to the system from a health perspective. Like in college I was on the, you know, it's kind of like not a flex here. I played college squash, which is like a sport that nobody here ever hear of unless they're like from like 4 towns in the Northeast, basically.
Yeah, it's like lacrosse and squash. I feel like is like only up in the Northeast.
Totally, yeah. Even like I used to think like rowing was kind of obscure, fencing was obscure, and then I was like, actually, like more people know what fencing is than squash.
But squash, for the people that don't know, it's kind of like a racquetballish type racket indoor sport.
Totally,
right?
yeah. So it's like pretty high intensity, great workout. But anyways,
Stay
kind
in
of
shape.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it's about, right? Like just longevity. But back to kind of this this first year analyst life at an investment bank, having never really interned in it either. It was a complete like shock to my system. Like, you know, you wake up, and from the point you wake up in the day, your time isn't yours. And even the idea of like fitness, it's like, well, fitness maybe on like, you know, maybe you'll have the chance to go and work out on like a Sunday after you've you've worked for 6 days, like nonstop, putting together decks, get home at like, you know, like maybe it just makes sense to kind of give you like the lay of the land in terms of like, you know, you get into work at like, I don't know, 7 a.m. just so that you can like get on a call with some other junior bankers at other firms who are like underwriting deals or whatever. And, you know, I worked at TD's investment bank, and you'd just be like, hey, TD's on. And that would be why you arrived like 2 hours early to the office, just to like get on the phone call, be like, hey, TD is on. And then you'd go and just like spend, you know, half of your day kind of waiting for work to come in, not able to like leave your desk. And then, you know, once you finally got work at, you know, 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock, you'd be working, you know, basically until it was done, kind of like an 8 hour, 9-hour workday. So, you know, you get off at 11, you get home at midnight, you go to bed, and you just repeat the day. And there's not like a ton of flexibility. So that was kind of like my first experience to having never had to like, you know, work a real job, having a pretty laid back college experience where like, yeah, you have, you know, some classes, but you can kind of go and sneak in a nap in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
It was completely a shock to me.
What about your coworkers? Was the culture friendly towards like getting a workout in, or was everyone just kind of stuck in the office?
I think definitely the latter. I think it was just like not conducive to a healthy lifestyle. So, you know, and later on, you know, there's definitely more of the, you know, these were younger people, I think, at this first place I worked. And so like you weren't really seeing like the consequences of like bad decisions later on in life. But,
yeah.
You know, I moved to another firm, you know, soon after, right? Like I was kind of like, this is terrible. Because like the work, you know, the work wasn't really interesting and the lifestyle was terrible, but it was mainly like the work side. I was like, okay, like just keep on cranking through. And then at the second firm I worked at, I encountered like 40-year-old men who like had strokes. Yeah. And you're like, that's insane. Like, how does that happen? And then and I think really like for me, the rationale that I sort of determined, or like my theory on like how you get a stroke when you're like 40 is sleep deprivation, like number one. So it's like number one, like you're not sleeping more than 4 hours a night, and it's not like a temporary thing, it's like a forever thing, right? Like it's just like, it's like the status quo of your life. You're just like getting 4 hours of sleep. And I think you could sort of get used to that. Like you could sort of imagine like maybe you're just operating consistently at like 80%. But I think for like really young people, to like not sleep is terrible. So that's number one. And then two, I think, is the stress, right? So like, oftentimes you have like deadlines. Some of them are real, some of them are sort of made up. And this can be something personally you do. Like it might not even be imposed by the people around you, where you say like, I need to do this now. And maybe you're somebody who overthinks, or you're just like naturally have a bit of anxiety, and you can take things that aren't such a big deal and make them kind of like a big deal. So I think, yeah.
Did you see anyone that you were working with or the seniors there that did a good job with it?
So here's where I think like the people who were really good at drawing boundaries, and this didn't come at a junior level, this came more at a senior level, but the people who were really good at drawing boundaries, had developed, they'd put in the time, suffered for, at least 5 years, maybe longer. And we're just really good at being like, no, I'm not gonna work on this project. No, I'm gonna go home at a normal time. And then, so that was kind of like one bucket of people were kind of like above the threshold of like, putting in your time kind of. But then kind of at the top, there were some senior guys who, you kind of become like a salesman. And sometimes like you want like the cool salesman who like takes really good care of himself and like has like, like a white smile and like a good demeanor, want to go grab a beer with them. And so there are a lot of guys like good number of guys like that who are really focused on their health. And I really respected that about them, that like, they're like, they understood that longevity was important and that, their image was important, especially if you're trying to like win business effectively, like in the sales role. But then I'd also like my boss, like the head of my group or whatever, is like, just insane. Like, there's a Wall Street Oasis, chat boards about his sleeping habits, and, all these like, all these former analysts or people at other banks, like, oh, we're like, this guy doesn't sleep. Like, I think he's like, a robot, like, just like constant, nonstop grinding. Like, they're all the like Twitter influencers who are like, I wake up at 4 a.m. and like, I take a cold plunge and I like grind. I'm like, no, like this guy's like grinding like for a living. And, certainly there's some truth to like, through pure like work ethic and, a lot of intelligence in this guy's case, like you can be very successful in a lot of things. And I appreciated that. But for me, like, it was like, it was like poison, just spending more and more time there as a junior banker. And so, I worked, I think, across these two banks, I worked like 3 years, kind of got promoted. And then I was like, okay, like, I kind of want to do something else. And so it's like one of those like interesting points where like sometimes when you really want to like leave somewhere, you kind of can't. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of, you're trying to recruit for jobs, but you're like tired or whatever. Not great. So yeah, anyways, I think it was sort of like coming to the realization that like, one, the only way you're going to kind of have like a reasonably normal life is if you could say, hey, like, I know you expect this, work to be done, but I'm going to, ask you really firmly for like, hey, like, can I get this done later? Or can I do this like, tomorrow? And, or, just siloing off time to like sleep, like go to the gym, whatever. A lot of it was really like when you kind of like break it down, like self-imposed. Like you could make your life hell, or you can make it like relatively good, just by having that like, I'm gonna go and try to silo off time by talking to, my managing director or, your VP or like whomever. But I think that was like kind of an important, like outside of like, horrifically bad hours or whatever, it was kind of just this idea of like drawing boundaries.
It does sound like it's a cultural problem too. So it's like, it sounds like people just know, oh, you got to put in the time. You got to embrace the suck for these few years, and then then you'll have more freedom. But we need to make sure you're strong enough, type thing, to get to do this to your body or to get
Yeah.
through it. And to me that's led by the leadership, led at the top, and a lot of the MBAs. Those are the positions they're going to go in. And I really think like they got to think long and hard. Is this really useful, or are we doing this just because we've always done it this way? Like, is there a way to do it that you don't have to sacrifice your sleep, your wellness? And I'm pretty positive there's probably you can figure it out.
I think you're right. I mean, it's kind of like one of those things where like in any position of like merit, people kind of believe that like it's earned, like, and therefore that like whatever terrible things kind of like befell them at some point, like in hazing or for like
It is
joining,
like hazing.
yeah, it's like it's like pledging a fraternity and getting hazed. But like basically you're like, okay, well, like you would hope that people like I like to think, at least, and like maybe I'm just like, this is like some fake story I'm telling, but that like I wasn't sadistic to younger people, because I was like, well, this has a lot of like negative effects on like people's lives, like friendships and physical health, all these things that like you can absolutely destroy by creating like a terrible work environment and just kind of like have it haunt you for a really long time. I think it's definitely interesting to kind of observe like who really has it, like, well, I had it bad, so you need to have it too mentality, and just like making it a point to like try to avoid those people. I think in any organization you'll find people like that. I'm not sure how much like you can really reshape a culture, right, at the ground level, and instead it's just like finding ways to insulate yourself and saying like, here's where I would never go, right? Like I would never, and this is a real story, I would never miss my the birth of my first child because my boss called me in to some meeting, right? And I swear I've heard stories of people, getting screamed at when they're in the delivery room to like leave and go,
Wow.
meet some client, and you're like I would never make that trade. That's like a terrible trade, right? Like your wife hates you, like you're not necessarily even going to be like paid more money or anything. So it's kind of like, I think just like the extreme cases it's really simple, but it requires, as a young person, when you're like definitely in this like pledging process and you're kind of on 4 hours of sleep, you're like half awake and you're just like, I'll just do whatever I'm told, to kind of like, take a step back and think about, A, like, for how long can I endure this? And B, for like, is this really necessary? And can I kind of like, wiggle my way into something that's like more like sensible?
Was that the tipping point for you? Because you're saying how you're like, okay, I need to find something else. Was it a health focused thing?
Yeah. So for me, it was kind of like, I developed like a lot of like stomach issues, and it was from stress. And I was kind of like, oh, I guess like, my stomach hurts, and it must be like, must be related to me, eating dairy, or like, I don't know, like, maybe I'm allergic to like nuts, like, and like I'd come up with all these excuses, and it was like, no, it's because like you're pounding caffeine like just to stay awake, like in a given day. You've pulled like 2 all-nighters in the last 10 days, like you look as pale as a ghost. and this is entirely like stress induced. And I remember going to like my GP, or like my family doctor in the city, and talking to him, and he's like, you need to quit this job. Like, he's like, you know, based on what you're telling me, like there are more important things than like money. And what's funny is like, okay, like you don't have that much like flexibility. So let's say you decide Mike, you're like, hey, like I don't want to work in this role anymore. Right? So I guess there are two schools of thought. One is like, I'm just going to quit the job right here and now, and I'm going to go like, you know, live in the woods, or like find some like chill job that like, you know, become a cashier at Starbucks. I knew a couple people who like kind of went down that road. Like, it wasn't a big block of people, but I knew some people kind of like went down that road within this very like toxic culture. And again, I don't think every single firm is like this. I think it was just like an interesting experience for me to work for one lucky group that was kind of like that. But, you know, or you kind of have the school of thought of like gradual change. Like, how do I gradually improve my situation so that I can like move to another career that's like adjacent to this, where my lifestyle's like a little bit better. And from there, just kind of like keep on moving, you know, because for me, right, like I was still very, like, still saw this as a means to an end. I was like, oh, I'm going to create like, you know, some kind of energy company or whatever. And right now just work in finance, and, you know, one day it'll just like come together. Mm-hmm. But you're like, okay, like I look like a 35-year-old man at 25. Like this is not going to end too well if I'm like going to wait 10 years until something kind of clicks. But you know, what I could do was, you know, there were some projects I was working on, and I could basically, I knew that there was an opportunity to basically get hired at another firm. One of my bosses left to like another bank, and he was sort of like, hey, like, you know, if you're looking for a job, I can hire you.
Like, it can't be worse than where it is right now.
Yeah. And I actually kind of use that as like a backstop to like just take a little bit of time off, right? Like, yeah. I got promoted, so I was like, okay, I know. It's like, you know, when you play a game and you get to like the next checkpoint, you're like, okay, I can start from this checkpoint. I'll be like, you know, an associate instead of an analyst, and like, you know, hopefully like fingers crossed the game doesn't get deleted and they're like, no, you repeat those terrible 3 years. But effectively I like kind of left and spent like 6 months working on this like energy related venture, really like, you know, going and developing this business plan for this project that I'd been like, you know, kind of thinking about for a really long time. It didn't really like turn into anything. I was like kind of hopeful that it would at that point in time. Mm-hmm. It kind of became something later like that was really positive, so that was great, but don't really need to go down that road. But effectively I was like, okay, so I can always go back and get a job at this bank or my old bank, and you know, ultimately I ended up just like running out of money in my whatever the venture I was working on, living in like, you know, living in New York, which is like really expensive but awesome place to go and take like 6 months off from work and like kind of use that to go and like hang out and enjoy yourself.
Yeah, unlimited things to do in New York.
So much stuff to do. Like, met a lot of cool people. Like, really put the time in on this project and felt like, okay, this is interesting. But got to a point where I was like, hey, like, I need money again. This is not like gonna be, you know, this is not the time to like really say, okay, I'm done. I'm an entrepreneur now.
Did your health feel better though? Did you notice that?
My health improved like dramatically. Like I could work out like every single day. I could sleep like 12 hours a day. And it was almost like there's like this instantaneous reduction in stress, where I was like, people would say that like my skin looked better. Like it definitely took, you know, there's a little bit of a reversal of what had happened for the last like 4 years or whatever.
Yeah.
So like, yeah. So for me, I think like that was really nice, taking that time to kind of be like, okay, well, you know, it's like you take a breath of air and you can kind of plot out what you want your life to actually look like, instead of living in this like constant state of like, you know, one project to the next project to the next project. So that was good for me. But ultimately, I did end up again just because it was like, you know, the easiest thing for me at another bank. But I really made sure that the firm I worked at next was like very like, I looked at like the fitness of the people who work there. That was like my gauge. It's like, you know, are there any like dark circles?
The baggy eyes.
Yeah, baggy eyes. Like, how baggy are their eyes? Like, how fit do these people look on average? And you know, this is like an energy only investment bank, and I was kind of like, okay, like these people look pretty healthy, and you know, the other thing I looked at was like the family sizes, like big families, like do the MDs have a lot of kids? And it was like, yeah, they have tons of kids. Like these are busy guys with their families. They're not going to be calling me, you know, Friday night at, you know, 2 a.m. to like scramble into the office. Like they've got real stuff. And there are obviously some like trade-offs, like, you know, probably took a bit of a pay cut. But my lifestyle was markedly better. What kind of sucked is like, it was spectacular. Like that was like 2019, spectacular the first year I worked there. And then kind of COVID hit and actually just made my life terrible because like the area that I was working on, which was like bankrupt companies in the energy space, was horrible. Like every energy company went bankrupt. And so it's just like, yeah, it just shows you that like, you know, there's definitely volatility in all this stuff. But
I think some oil prices were like negative during COVID, right? Because they couldn't store it. They're like,
yeah, effectively, like, yeah, I forget what they'd call that day, but they'd like to talk about like the Russia, Russia OPEC war, price war. That was like a big topic, like, you know, OPEC flooding the market. These companies just like, yeah, getting absolutely killed on prices they receive for their production and stuff. And then just like tons of debt just because like that's just how everybody operates.
They just start laying people off, or
you couldn't really lay people off. It was basically like shutting in production, like just going to your wells and like closing them basically. And then like the layoffs like happened later. But yeah, effectively it was like, we don't have any money anymore. Like we literally don't have $1 of cash flow, like, wow. You know, or you know, and so we need to file for bankruptcy ASAP, right? Like when prices were really low, and you know, they're offshore guys who had shut in, like, you know, you can't shut off all your production. Like you can only shut off kind of like older stuff. But anyways, whatever. That's like totally a tangent there. The key thing is just that like that made my life really bad again. But like, I guess like to kind of like curtail the story a little bit. Like, you know, what was nice is as this time had progressed, the original like business idea I was working on kind of came closer to fruition. And so like, you know, I was like closer to the place where I was like, okay, I can actually quit my job without running out of money and like maybe pivot to like this entrepreneurship track. But yeah, I kind of like got to this point post COVID where like my hours are actually, I got promoted again. My hours are getting worse and worse and worse. And the responsibilities were getting more and more, you know, stressful. So like I think it's just like periodically in life you have to kind of like look at your situation and say like, okay, like, is this really what I thought it would be? I don't know, like somebody would refer to this kind of as like the, you know, like the arrival fallacy. Like a lot of people, you talk to them, especially younger people, they like imagine like, okay, I'm biking up this hill and it's terrible and it's painful and whatever, but I know that like once I get to the top, like, you know, I'll get to the top at some point, I'll look over the edge and it'll be all downhill from there and like life will be great. And a lot of people kind of apply that to careers. They do something they like thoroughly do not enjoy or like is thoroughly not sustainable. I felt like to some extent like that wasn't the case for me. Like I did enjoy it. I learned a lot. I met very intelligent people, but to some extent I did believe that like one day I'd get promoted to like some position. I don't know what that position would be. I guess it was always like the next position, right? Like it was always like, oh no,
finish line keeps going.
Yeah. So it was like, when I'm an associate, like my life will be great. When I'm a VP, my life will be great. Like I always imagine that, or like things will change entirely, and like it'll be all like steak lunches and like client meetings or whatever. And who knows? Maybe I just never got there. But it seemed to me like that was just like a major fallacy that I'd encounter with other people as well, and even like moving into other areas, right? Like from their job, like people saying, okay, if I only got a job offer at this like hedge fund or this private equity firm, all of a sudden I would feel this sense of like completeness, and I'd feel like I'd made it, and like my lifestyle would get better. And that just never happened for me. And I think maybe that says something about my own like managerial skills, but it also says something about like just psychology in general. And just that like, things like, if something isn't, if something isn't really like working out for you, it might never work out for you.
No, I think that's a lot of people struggle with that arrival fallacy.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've read the book, The Precious Present. It's like a short story. Spencer Johnson, I think it's the same guy that did like Who Moved My Cheese. I don't know if he's a psychologist or what, but the whole thing is like this kid, he's like, what's the precious present? Like he wants to know this old guy. And the precious present, like I'll cut it short, it's being in the present. It's not worrying about the past, not always anticipating the future. Like to actually be in the present right here, right now is a life hack. Because like you said, if you're not enjoying the climb, if you're not enjoying the day in, day out, I don't think you'll ever enjoy it.
I 100% agree. Like in hindsight, and yeah, that was something that like I think it's hard to be there in the present, like for anybody. But I think I probably fall into the category of like overthinker, like over anxious person. And there's some positive attributes associated with that. Like, hey, like maybe you are more thoughtful, but yeah, you really do have to avoid thinking too much about the future. Like you really do. Like that can really make your life unpleasant. But yeah, like, so for me, I kind of realized, okay, I'm not going to do what I did the last time on this career track where I like quit with no job. I'll basically, go and look for a really chill job that's like kind of adjacent to what I've been doing. So I thought it'd be really cool to work for like the federal government, right? And again, it was more like you hear all these things about the federal government, and I was like curious if they were true, and I knew I could like kind of slide into a specialist job because I'd done a lot of this kind of like niche work in like pensions and like restructuring. So I was kind of like but I was applying to like basically any government job, maybe like 100 jobs, 1,000 jobs, like just anything, like every single thing. And then one day got like a couple emails, like responded to them from random people and agencies, and then like literally like 8 months after I had applied, like some ridiculous amount of time, one day I just got an interview and like at 2 different agencies, and then got a job offer immediately after. And I was like, this is so weird that like this process is so opaque, and things take so long. And apparently there's like this hack that they told me, like the HR people told me this. They were like, what you do is they'll offer you like a really low salary, right? And it's based on like the general schedule. And you basically say like, look, I'm a specialist. Like I have some skills that aren't like easily transferable or obtainable within the government. And so like you have to match my prior salary to the best of your abilities. So then they just max you out on pay, which is like an insane thing that people come into the government at like, they come to the government and like have to work like 40 years to like get to a reasonable salary grade
for their skill level.
Yeah. And so I feel like that was, fortuitous for me, at least, like just, I don't know.
And just having the self-awareness, like it's not easy to, like you said, evaluate your status, like take a step back. Is this really where I want to be right now?
Totally.
And to make that jump.
Yeah. And a lot of people are like, you're an idiot. Like you're taking like a substantial pay cut. Like, But you're kind of like, okay, well, the amount of, like, my hourly is still probably not that great. And like people always talk about that, but it's like, yeah, my hourly, it's also like, you know, the AT&T like nights and weekends plan when you were a kid, or Singular, whichever one had that. And it's like, normally you're paying, extra money for, but like, for international travel or like whatever. I don't know exactly what the plan was, so forgive me. But the way I looked at it is like your time at like, 2 a.m. on a Saturday is more valuable than 11 a.m. on a Tuesday, like just the fact that people could make you work such like obscure offbeat hours. And in the government you would clock in and clock out. And the pay was actually like, I mean, it wasn't bad. Yeah. Like it was a pay cut, but I was like, the base was pretty good. The benefits were pretty good. The people were like the nicest people ever versus the finance people. I was like absolutely shocked. I was like, I'm so used to being like, spoken to in like sarcastic New Yorker, like finance parlance, that like I just encountered like the nicest people in the world. It was like fully remote due to COVID. And there was some exception where I could like, they're like, you could go and work in Austin. So it was actually then where I like moved to Austin to be closer to my older brother, who's like a chef down here. And I worked that job for like a year while I was applying to MBA programs, actually. Yeah. So it was like I was like, okay, well, I might not like this job, so I'm going to preemptively, apply to MBA. And, I kind of like enjoyed the job, really liked the people. Like I had an exceptionally kind boss, really my boss and my boss's boss and my boss's boss's boss were all like the nicest people I'd probably ever worked with in my entire life. The work itself was like pretty interesting. It was like, it was like a big pension insurer. It was like the government's, the equivalent of like the FDIC for banks, but for like pensions. And we did like
teachers unions have that kind of stuff and all that.
Yeah. It was like corporate pensions that like companies went like bankrupt and then they're like, hey, we don't want to deal with this pension anymore. Can the government like absorb it with their insurance money? And then like, it's kind of complicated, but the gist of it was like pretty interesting. Like, but it just like, I don't know. I think it was almost like detox. Like, like detox is pretty hard on your body because you're like so used to just like straight,
Yeah.
And for me, it was basically like really hard to acclimate to having like, so much free time. And I would work Monday through Thursday. Like I was also kind of still really interested in this project that I'd been working on. And I knew that like I wouldn't really be able to do it. Like, I wouldn't really be able to push that project forward if I worked in the government. There are like a lot of conflicts and stuff. So, applied to these MBA programs. Like basically it was like between like, Dartmouth and UT. I really liked both programs. I was pretty close to going to talk, like kind of like told them I was going to go, went on the boat. There was like a boat trip that was like an intro. And then I was kind of like there, and I like, again, really nice MBAs actually, like great kids I met on this like boat trip to Croatia or like whatever it was. It's like you spend a week on a boat, like traveling around Croatia with other MBAs. And it was like really like nice, but two things. One, like I had all my stuff in Austin. Like I had my car and it's like, I have to move my car all the way up. Two, I was like, I started talking to a lot of the people in that program, and it's kind of like to go and do something in like natural resources or energy, like, and again, I think like, this business model that I was like working toward was kind of like, I guess like on shorthand, it would just be like resources exploration. Just didn't exist when like UT is like the best research institution in the country for like energy, right? So after the boat trip, I was like, hey guys, I kind of was like on the fence, but then I was like by the end of right after the boat trip, I was kind of like, okay guys, like I'm sorry, I'm not actually going to go and like matriculate into the first year class with you. Like, you were awesome. Like, I'm really sorry. And then I kind of ended up here. Yeah.
Well, I think that shows like it's not just the salary, right? Like, it's not just the number, and it's not just maybe in the name of the program. Like, there's so many things to consider, like based on your values, based on you want to do for like what would make a good decision. And I think that's proof to that.
Totally. I mean, for me, it was like, okay, like ultimately you spend your entire life like if you are really passionate about stuff, like you spend your entire life kind of gravitating toward like where you want to be, and like maybe you never get there, and like I'm okay with that. Like, I'm totally okay with like this life where, you know, you work towards something and you don't like necessarily like succeed, right? Like, I can live with that.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing for me was like that you were the process, right? The journey in life is like moving toward where you want to be. It's like, you know, like Mike, like where do you see yourself in 10 years, or like what is like the perfect life for you, the perfect job for you? Like I don't know, like I mean, I'm
something to think about though,
yeah,
right? Like, you should
yeah,
something, not just flying blind. Like, it should have a philosophy, a thought. Like,
totally.
that's the mind part. You know, we talk about being fit or eating well, but that mental part is so huge, and it's probably the most difficult to like have a clear mind and a good philosophy going through life.
Totally. I mean, I think like, you know, I think the one thing I can kind of hang on to is like, I think there is some moral compass that like I feel like I might have developed, maybe like I might be lucky enough to have, because like when I've been really going in the wrong direction in life, like it's like, hey, like this job is literally killing you, like you're not really doing what you thought you were going to do. There's like the strong kind of like gravitational pull to like get away from that.
Yeah.
And you felt like, you know, it felt more like yeah, like you were naturally drawn toward like, I don't know, like you're kind of disgusted by like bad people you worked with, for example. You'd be like, okay, like no, and you know, even though I left this government job or whatever, I was like, you know, there was something nice about being like, well, these are really good people, and that's extremely rare that you find such good people. And even though like I don't necessarily have the same view on like, you know, career goals, like a lot of those people are kind of like, okay, I'll just like work here forever, and I'll just kind of like do a good enough job. And that's totally fine. But but at least I could see like there's something really positive about that, you know?
Yeah.
And the same thing about like UT, like I felt like when I met people here, there's a lot of veterans, a lot of people with families, like, you know, children, a lot of kind of like, there's like a nice sort of like Texas aura that I sort of felt that you wouldn't really get necessarily like in the Northeast. So I don't know. I like to think that like, you know, I'm not like super religious, but like I like to think that there's some kind of like moral or higher power, like gravitational, like some sort of pull that has in your life. And like you just have to kind of be willing to be like it's kind of like when some people who are like really good decision makers, like really good traders or negotiators or whatever, they're like, yeah, my gut, I just thought this was the right like decision, the right trade or whatever. Like I think that kind of applies to like everything in my life, where I'm like, okay, not going in the right direction here. It's like, my stomach. Yeah. So I think that's kind of like the positive. But yeah, now I'm here, and I think like it's been really good to you know, hopefully like, you know, not figure out all the secrets of the world in like 2 years of taking like you know corporate finance classes, but I think it's good to like kind of MBA is like a stopping point in life. Like I don't know, like how do you view your MBA experience, right? Like
Yeah.
I don't know.
we're out of time. We're running out of time. I don't know if we probably could keep going for another 30 minutes. But I really appreciate you sharing your health journey and I think my big takeaway from hearing that is like always evaluating where I'm at, where I want to be. Is this good for my health? Like
totally
not just physical health, like the diet, but also like mental health. Like all those things should go into the calculus and making decisions. So I really appreciate bringing that to light.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll just kind of close here with like, I think you can really clearly be like taken advantage of in life if you don't develop a strong backbone and sort of some degree of periodic introspection, like being able to like be like, oh, this isn't great for me, right? And you need that to draw your boundaries in life and to say like, I won't do that for money, I won't do that for prestige or whatever, or my family comes first. It's like key to being very principled to have some degree of a backbone, like because you can have all these great principles in life, but if you can never really defend them, then it kind of what's the point, right?
It's purpose.
Yeah, so I don't know. That's it. That's all I got.
Well, thanks so much, Thomas. Thank you for listening to the McCombs Wellness Collective podcast, where we record weekly episodes during the semester to promote healthy habits and learn about personal wellness journeys. Stay well, my friends, and hook 'em horns.